I couldn't figure out what to do a video about today, so I decided to do it on Azriel's bonus chapter of The Court of Silver Flames. If you haven't read it, it is online. Simply just look up Azriel's bonus chapter and it'll come up. I'm not going to get into the whole Elriel Gwynriel thing because obviously I'm a Gwynriel. But what I did want to get into is how people always say that Azriel is entitled to Elaine and that huge blow-up fight with Rhys. First of all, Azriel is not the one that says he's entitled to Elaine. He's not the one that says that he deserves her or she had to be his. That's Rhysand. Rhys says, so you think you are entitled to her? Like, Rhys says that. He puts the words in Azriel's mouth. The only thing Azriel says is that maybe the cauldron was wrong and that he doesn't understand why the third sister wouldn't go to the third brother, which is logical in his mind. Because if you remember, Azriel's trauma stems from abandonment and being left out. He was stuck in a dark dungeon for 11 years of his life. The first 11 years of his life, he was alone and outcast. His brothers told him how awful and disgusting he was. They burned him. So his trauma stems from abandonment. Not only that, but his father did not let him see his mother except for 1 hour a week, and he didn't let him out of the dungeon except for 1 hour a day. And not only that, but his father was married to his stepbrother's mother, his stepmother, who hated him just as much as his brothers did. She was awful. There's all sorts of trauma there. But Azriel's root trauma is abandonment and basically being the outcast looking in. And it popped up here because, as he says, his two brothers are happily mated with two sisters, and that just dragged him back down to that dark place where he was alone and looking in to happiness from the outside. And we know that Azriel carries, like, a lot of sadness. He doesn't think he deserves anybody. Rhys went as far as to say that, like, he never thought he deserved more when he was crushing on more. We know that he has a thing about his hands touching people because he thinks they're, like, awful. And I just think that that's the whole reason why he was upset here. Because his trauma was affecting his emotions at that moment. He was yet again the outsider that didn't deserve the happiness that had it dangled in front of him and then ripped away. I do think his comments about Lucian were just out of that hurt and anger. Again, every other character has had their moment of rage. Literally every other character. Feyre, Rhys, Nesta, Cassian, Lucian even. They've all gotten to be angry. But somehow when Azriel is angry in this chapter and he says things out of that anger, people turn on him. And this is actually a big point in the book too, because he says that because he's a shadow singer, people automatically think he's evil. So he has to try even harder to seem like a normal person. And I think that the fandom, like, feeds into that, because a lot of people have turned on Azriel since the bonus chapter and have said that, oh, he's gross now, he seems possessive and entitled to Elaine, and all of this shit. And I'm like, that's not the point of this scene. The point of this scene is to lead into Azriel's book by showing his emotions, by showing that he is not always just that stone-faced person that we think. He's a person with real emotions and real pain, too, that says things. And if you put yourself in Azriel's shoes for a minute, how many of us would have ever gotten through any of that? Because I give Az a lot of props for the horrible life that he's led. Because, again, he was born, his father took him from his mother. He was caged in the dark for 11 years. He was burned by his brothers, abused by his stepmother, kicked out into a war camp where he had never even lived outside before, and he's suddenly thrust into this war camp. He doesn't know how to fly. Rhys and Cassian have to teach him how to fly at the age of 11, which is super old for Illyrians. And then they become friends, become super powerful, and Rhys's father uses him as a spymaster and a torturer, which I still don't think he enjoys doing because his trauma stems from torture, and he basically has to do that to other people. To be fair, Azriel only tortures people who are going to do harm to innocent people. It's kind of like a Robin Hood situation, which, okay. But it still has to be hard for him because his trauma stems from torture. But basically, he just feels left out all the time. The one place he felt right was with his brothers, and now he's being left out of the group with his brothers too. So I don't think it was actually about Azriel feeling entitled to Elaine, or even really wanting Elaine. And we get that in his point of view in the bonus chapter where he says he never thought about a future with her other than the images of her that he pleasured himself to at night. So it's not about him wanting Elaine. It's about him wanting to be loved, which is even sadder. Because if you think about it, like, he didn't think he deserved more. Moore ignores him and throws herself at Cassian. And she doesn't tell him why. So he has to think, like, that she thinks he's, like, disgusting or evil or whatever, like everyone else thinks outside of the inner circle. But then you have Rhys, who kept Azriel doing the same job that his father had him doing. That clearly affects him very deeply. And you would think that Rhys, as his so-called brother, would see this or understand this, but he doesn't. In fact, Rhys heavily favors Cassian, which is awful to say, but throughout the books he heavily favors Cassian, and we see him joking and laughing around with Cassian, but then he sends Azriel on all these missions. He overworks him, especially in Akamath. That was very noticeable, which is awful. But, like, Azriel just wants love, and this boy deserves to be loved, please, Gwen. And we know from Azriel's point of views, that we've gotten, like, the very light sprinkled sort of narrative kind of point of views that we've gotten, that he thinks he has to deserve love. He thinks that he has to work for it, which is not something anybody should have to do. But that's why he overworks himself as the spymaster / shadow singer / torturer. That's why he immediately answers what Rhys wants him to do. Like I said, especially in Akamath, where there was the scene where they were at the Archeron's cabin, and then Azriel took the adder to get tortured, and then Rhys says, oh, when he's done with that, he's gonna go do this. And then when he's done with that, he's gonna go do this. And it's like, can you give him a break? Because he's doing all of this so he can deserve to stay in the inner circle. Like, he doesn't think that he deserves to be there unless he's working for it. Which is, again, stems from his trauma of not being cared about and having to be a certain way to be loved. And that's just awful. Which is another reason why I said I wasn't going to get into it, but that's why I want him with Gwen, because I feel like Gwen kind of has the same trauma as him, and they will really connect that way.